She returned 2 years later after cheating on me with my friend. I was born in a state people usually forget to mention unless they are talking about tornado weather alerts or the best pie at a gas station. And I do not mean that as an insult. I mean it as a badge. Because simple places teach you simple math. If you work, you eat. If you lie, you get caught. And if you do both long enough, your conscience starts sending invoices. I grew up with a dad who fixed anything that squeaked and a mom who believed a clean kitchen could fix a bad day, which is probably why I ended up building a cleaning services business. It felt familiar, like I was creating order in a world that kept trying to spill coffee on itself. By the time I hit my early 30s, I had a steady job during the day. I had contracts on nights and weekends. And I had a wife who made our little house feel like a finished project. Her name was Lila. She had a laugh that sounded like she was letting the world off the hook. And she could make a grocery list feel like a love letter. We were not flashy, no designer furniture, no matching luggage sets, just a working truck, a decent mortgage, and a plan that felt sturdy. Our friend Tommy was part of that plan in a strange way, not because he invested or anything, but because he had been around since the beginning. He was the guy who helped me move my first pressure washer out of my mom's garage. He was the guy who gave Lila a cheap but thoughtful housewarming gift, a ridiculous doormat that said, "Hope you like dog hair," even though we did not have a dog. He was always around for barbecues, always good for a joke, always the kind of friend you do not question because he is already part of the background. Like a familiar song playing low in a store, you do not notice it until it changes. The first sign something changed was so small it felt silly to mention. Lila started smiling at her phone the way people smile at a secret. And I do not mean the normal kind of smile when you see a funny video. I mean the kind that shows up and disappears fast, like she forgot someone might be watching. When I asked her what was up, she said nothing, just happy, just thinking about us. And the words were sweet, but the timing was off, like someone laughing 1 second too late at a joke. Then there were the new habits. She started working out in the living room, not casually, not for health, but like she was training for something, like a performance. She bought a new water bottle that looked like it belonged to a fitness influencer. She started taking longer showers, and she started using a perfume that I had never smelled before. It was not a bad scent. It was just unfamiliar, and unfamiliar smells are like unfamiliar voices in your hallway. They make you listen harder. I told myself I was being dramatic, because I am a simple man, and simple men like me do not enjoy inventing trouble. We fix what is broken, and we move on. We do not stare at shadows and call them monsters. Plus, business was finally getting traction. I had landed a contract with a small medical office, the kind that needed everything spotless, and I was proud of that. Proud enough that when I came home I wanted peace, not detective work. But peace is a funny thing. It either lives in your house, or it does not. And when it does not, you start noticing the silence between words. Lila started asking odd questions, like what time my last job ran, whether I would be stopping by the supply store, whether I could pick up something random, like a certain brand of dish soap we never used, and she would act casual about it. But it felt like she was placing tiny road signs on my schedule, guiding me away from home at certain times. One evening she greeted me at the door like I was a returning hero, which would have been flattering if it did not feel rehearsed. She wrapped her arms around me too tight, then stepped back and studied my face, and said, "You look tired. You work too much. You deserve something good." And I joked, like a nap and a sandwich, and she laughed. But her eyes were doing math, counting, checking, measuring. That night I lay awake beside her and listened to her breathing, and I hated myself a little for it, because I loved her, and love is supposed to be trust, not surveillance. Still, my mind kept replaying the same thought. When did my house start feeling like a room I needed permission to enter? The next day at work I could not focus. My boss was talking about deadlines and I was thinking about dish soap, which is not a sentence I ever wanted to say out loud. And around lunch my phone buzzed. It was Tommy. He sent a message that said, "Hey man, you still got that ladder you loaned me?" Random question. And that would have been normal except he had returned the ladder weeks ago. I remembered because I had cleaned it and put it back. I replied, "Yeah, why?" And he took a while to respond. Then said, "Never mind, must be thinking of someone else." And I stared at the screen like it had blinked at me. On my drive home I told myself the truth in a calm voice. Maybe nothing is happening. Maybe Lila is just trying to be happier. Maybe Tommy is just being Tommy. Maybe I am stressed. Maybe I am tired. Maybe this is what adulthood feels like, suspicious about ladders and dish soap. When I pulled into the driveway, Lila was in the kitchen. She turned fast and smiled. "Too fast again," she said. "You are early." And I said, "Am I?" And she said, "Just a little," and her hands moved to cover something on the counter. Nothing dramatic, just quick, like she was protecting a surprise. I tried to lean into that idea. Maybe she was planning a nice dinner. Maybe she was finally learning that my heart can be bought with carbs. But then her phone lit up and she flipped it over like it was a hot pan, and she laughed, and I laughed too. Because sometimes you laugh when your instincts start shouting, and you want to pretend they are just being noisy. That night she suggested we visit her parents over the weekend. which was not weird. Except she said it like she needed witnesses, like she wanted to show the world we were. Fine, I said sure. And she looked relieved, and I should have felt good about that. But something in my chest tightened. Later while she slept I got up for water, and I saw her purse on the chair, slightly open. And I am not proud of what I did next. I did not dump it out or go full movie villain. I just glanced, and I saw a small receipt from a local diner. Timestamp for a lunch hour on a day she told me she ate at home. And at the bottom was a handwritten note in a different ink. Call me when he leaves, and there was no name. Just that. I stood there holding my cup of water, staring at a scrap of paper like it was a warning label. And in that moment I realized something that made my throat go dry. My marriage might already be in trouble, and I might be the only person who does not know the full story yet. So I made a decision that felt both smart and pathetic. I told myself I would watch quietly, just for a little while, not to punish her, not to catch her, but to protect whatever was still real between us. And if everything was innocent, the first would laugh at myself and move on. And if it was not, then at least I would not be blindsided. I did not know then that my next early drive home would show me a pickup truck in my driveway, and a truth in my own living room that would split my life into before and after, and I definitely did not know how many people would try to rewrite that truth later. As if my eyes were optional, as if my memory could be negotiated, as if dignity was something you could trade for comfort. But that is the thing about simple men from simple states. We might not talk fancy, we might not play games, but when the world tests us, we learn fast, and we remember everything. The morning it happened started like any other working day, alarm buzzing like it had a personal grudge, coffee tasting like motivation with a hint of regret, and me reminding myself that today was about invoices, not imagination. I kissed Lila on the cheek, and she smiled in that careful way again, the smile that feels practiced, and she asked what time I would be home. Not casually, not curious, but precise, and I said the usual, late afternoon unless something changes, and she nodded like she was checking a box on a list I could not see. At work I tried to focus on floors and windows and schedules, but my mind kept drifting back to that receipt, that note, those little signs stacking up like unpaid bills. Around noon my boss told us we were ahead of schedule, and he sent a few of us home early, just like that. Unexpected freedom, and my first thought should have been lunch or rest. But instead my stomach tightened, because suddenly I was off script. I sat in my truck for a minute staring at the steering wheel, telling myself this was nothing, that I could go home, surprise my wife, maybe finally enjoy one of those afternoons she claimed to love. And another voice in my head said, or you could finally stop guessing. I did not like that voice, but it was loud. The drive home felt longer than usual, every red light acting like it knew something I did not. When I turned onto our street, everything looked normal at first, lawns trimmed, quiet air. Then I saw it, parked a little too close to my driveway. A familiar pickup truck, Tommy's pickup truck, same faded paint, same dent near the tail light. And my heart did not drop dramatically like in movies. It slowed, heavy and cold, like it was preparing for work. I did not park right away. I rolled past my house and stopped down the street, sat there with my hands on the wheel, thinking maybe there was an explanation. Maybe he needed a tool. Maybe Lila asked him to fix something. Maybe this was just bad timing meeting bad imagination. I almost believed that, almost. Then I noticed the engine was still warm, and that detail mattered more than it should have, because it meant he had not just arrived. And he was not planning to leave quickly either. I parked quietly and walked back, not up the driveway like a normal husband, but around the side, like someone trying not to interrupt a scene already in motion. I told myself I would just knock. That was the plan, knock like a civilized adult. But when I reached the front window and glanced inside, everything stopped. There they were, Lila and Tommy, standing too close, laughing too quietly, his hand resting where it had no business resting, her body leaning into a comfort that did not belong to him. And no, nothing explicit, nothing dramatic. But it was enough. It was more than enough. Because intimacy does not announce itself with fireworks. It whispers. My first feeling was not anger. It was clarity, sharp and sudden, like cold water. And the second feeling was disappointment, not just in them, but in how long I had doubted myself. I did not sneak away. I did not listen longer. I did not film anything. I did the simplest thing I could think of. I opened the door. The sound of it was loud in the quiet house, and they jumped like kids caught breaking a window. Lila gasped. Tommy turned pale, and for a second nobody spoke. It was almost funny, like the world forgot its lines. Then they both started talking at once. Excuses tripping over each other. Words like misunderstanding and not. What it looks like getting thrown around like emergency flares. I raised my hand, and they stopped. Not because I yelled, but because my voice was calm, calmer than I expected. I said, "You both need to leave. Now." Tommy tried to explain, said something about helping her, about stress, about friendship, and I looked at him and realized something important. He was not confused. He was just surprised to be seen. Lila started crying. saying my name like it was a password, saying she loved me, saying this was a mistake, and I nodded, because she was right about one thing. It was a mistake, but not the kind you erase, the kind you learn from. I told them both to get out, not screaming, not threatening, just firm, and when they hesitated I stepped aside and opened the door wider. Tommy grabbed his jacket and avoided my eyes. Lila lingered, trying to touch my arm, and I stepped back, not because I hated her, but because I respected myself, and that was new. She left, the door closed, and the house felt bigger and emptier at the same time. I locked the door and stood there for a moment, listening to the silence, half expecting regret to rush in, but it did not. Instead, I felt something steady, like the foundation of a building that just survived an earthquake, cracked but still standing. That night, I slept on the couch, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I needed space. The next day we talked, or tried to. Tears and apologies and explanations that circled the same point without landing anywhere honest. Within weeks we filed for divorce, and I thought that would be the hardest part. I was wrong, because the hardest part was not losing my wife. It was realizing how many people would later tell me to forget what I saw, to soften the truth, to be understanding at the cost of my own spine. And I had no idea yet that a year later the same door I closed would become a stage for persistence, persuasion, and a test of whether success and peace could survive. Nostalgia knocking loudly. That was still ahead. And at the time all I knew was this. My life had split cleanly in two. And somehow, quietly, the side I was standing on felt stronger. The weeks after the divorce papers were filed felt quieter than they should have. No dramatic shouting matches, no slammed doors, just a slow, careful dismantling of a shared life. Like unscrewing furniture you once thought would stay assembled forever. Lila moved out quickly, almost efficiently, which told me she had rehearsed this exit long before I ever opened that door. And I let that thought sit without chasing it, because some answers are only useful if you plan to bleed over them. Friends started choosing sides in the polite way people do, which is to say they pretended there were no sides at all. Tommy disappeared completely, changed numbers, stopped showing up anywhere I might be, and that silence spoke louder than any apology ever could. Lila's parents called once, careful voices, saying they loved me like a son, saying things were complicated, and I listened respectfully, then said nothing that would give them hope or comfort, because honesty is not cruelty. It just feels like it when you are not used to it. Work became my anchor, not in a dramatic grind yourself into dust way, but in a focused, purposeful way. I took more contracts, hired one part-time worker, then another, invested in better equipment, better scheduling, better systems. And somewhere along the line my cleaning business stopped being a side project and started becoming a name people recognized. Doctors' offices, small gyms, property managers, they all wanted someone reliable, someone quiet, someone who did not bring chaos into their space. And I smiled at the irony of that. At night, I learned how to sit with myself again, how to cook for one without resenting the silence, how to sleep without expecting someone else's breathing to sync with mine. And I will not lie and say it was easy, but it was honest. And honest pain heals cleaner than pretend happiness. Every now and then Lila would text, nothing bold, nothing desperate, just checking in, hoping I was well, mentioning memories like they were neutral objects we could both hold without getting cut. I responded politely and briefly, because boundaries are not punishments, they are instructions. About 6 months and I heard through someone else that things with Tommy had not worked out. That surprised exactly no one, but I did not celebrate, I just nodded. Because consequences do not need an audience. A year passed faster than I expected. Success as a way of bending time. My business was stable enough that I quit my day job, and the day I did that I sat in my truck afterward and laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because the man I was a year ago would not recognize this version of me, steadier, clearer, quieter. That night, I came home to my house again, and cooked a real meal, not a survival meal. And for the first time in a long time, I felt complete without anyone else filling the space. And that is usually when life tests you. It started with a knock, soft at first, then firmer, like someone unsure whether they were welcome but unwilling to leave. I opened the door, and there was Lila, thinner, nervous, holding herself like she might fall apart if she relaxed. She said my name the same way she used to, like it still belonged to her. She said she wanted to talk, just talk. She said she had made mistakes. She said time had changed her, and I listened, not because I owed her, but because I trusted myself. Enough to hear without folding. I told her now was not a good time, and I closed the door gently, not slammed, not angry, just final. The next day her parents called again, longer this time, asking me to reconsider, reminding me of history, of vows, of forgiveness, and I thanked them for their concern and said no. And when I hung up my hands were steady. That should have been the end, but it was not, because persistence wears many disguises, and sometimes the real test of growth is not surviving betrayal. It is surviving the pressure to undo your progress just to make others comfortable. And I could feel something building, a return, a push, a refusal to accept the answer already given. And I knew the quiet I had built was about to be challenged. And this time I would not be reacting, I would be choosing. If growth had a sound, it would be silence breaking on purpose. Because once people notice you are doing well without them, they get curious, then nervous, then bold. Lila did not show up again for a few weeks, and I hoped she had taken the hint. But hope is not a strategy. It started with messages, longer now, more emotional, less careful. She wrote about regret, about therapy, about realizing what she lost, and she ended every message with something that sounded reasonable. Can we just talk? I never replied, not out of spite, but because I had already talked, just not in the way she wanted. Then she came by again, this time during the day, when the neighborhood was awake, when witnesses existed. She stood on the porch like she was waiting for a verdict, and when I opened the door, she smiled through tears, said she missed me, said she missed us, and I felt a strange calm, the kind that comes when you recognize a pattern instead of a promise. I told her I was glad she was working on herself. I told her I wished her well, and I told her clearly that we were not getting back together. She nodded, wiped her face, and left, and I thought that might finally be enough. It was not. Her parents reached out again, more insistent now, inviting me to dinner, asking me to remember the good times, suggesting that forgiveness was strength, and I agreed with them on that last part. Forgiveness is strength, but so is walking away from what breaks you, and I declined politely. Around this time, my business hit another milestone. We landed a contract with a regional office chain, nothing flashy, but consistent, and I hired a manager, which meant I could step back a little, breathe, plan, think about a future that was not built around repair, and I realized something important. I was not just surviving anymore. I was thriving. That realization came with a cost, because success shines a light, and that light makes some people squint. Lila started telling mutual friends that she felt shut out, that I had changed, that success had hardened me, and I laughed when I heard that, because yes, I had changed, but not in the way she meant. One evening she showed up again, this time with her parents, standing together like a negotiation team, and I almost admired the coordination. They spoke calmly, reasonably, listing history, promises, shared memories like assets in a merger, and I listened, arms crossed, not defensive, just grounded. When they finished, I thanked them for coming, and I said something I had practiced in my head, but never out loud. I said, I forgave Lila a long time ago. Forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation, and my life is better now because I chose peace, not because I refused it. And I closed the door. After that, the visits stopped, the messages slowed, and the noise faded. And for the first time in a long while, I felt certain that the chapter was truly closing. I did not know then that the final twist would not come from Lila at all, but from a truth about Tommy, and a conversation that would reframe everything I thought I understood about loyalty, success, and the kind of man I had become. And when that truth surfaced, it would not shake me. It would confirm me, because sometimes the real victory is not being chosen again. It is choosing yourself once and never needing to renegotiate that decision. I thought the story was finished when the noise stopped, when the porch stayed empty and my phone stayed quiet. Life settled into a rhythm that felt earned, mornings with coffee and schedules, afternoons checking in with crews, evenings planning growth instead of damage control. And then one random Tuesday, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. And for a reason I still cannot explain, I answered it. The voice on the other end hesitated before saying my name, and that hesitation told me everything. It was Tommy, older sounding, less confident, the kind of voice that has rehearsed an apology and still knows it will land wrong. He said he needed to talk, said it was important, said he understood if I said no, and I paused. Not because I wanted closure, but because curiosity is quieter when you are no longer hurt. I told him he could talk, but not in my house. We agreed on a public place, a diner halfway between our worlds. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting stiff, hands wrapped around a coffee cup like it was keeping him upright. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but emotionally, like someone who had run out of excuses and finally noticed the damage. He started talking fast, explaining how everything fell apart after Lila and I split, how trust issues followed him, how he lost his job, how people stopped returning calls, and I listened without interrupting, because I did not need to win this conversation. Then he said something I did not expect. He said that what happened between him and Lila did not start the way I thought. He said it started with her venting, with complaints about my long hours, my focus on work, my ambition, and I almost laughed at that, because ambition had paid for our life. But I let him continue. He said he justified it by telling himself he was helping her, that I would not understand. And hearing that felt like watching someone explain how they walked into traffic because the light was green for someone else. Finally, he said the real reason he called. He said he wanted to tell me the truth before I heard it from someone else. He said Lila had tried to come back to him after I refused her, and when he said no, she turned angry, blaming him for ruining everything. And suddenly the picture sharpened. Her persistence, her timing, the sudden pressure campaign. It was not just regret. It was rejection layered on rejection. I thanked him for telling me. Not warmly, not coldly, just honestly. And I stood up to leave, and he asked how I could be so calm. And I told him the truth. I said, because this is no longer my mess to clean. And that felt like the most accurate sentence I had spoken in years. Driving home, I realized something important. Closure does not come from apologies. It comes from clarity. And clarity had finally clocked in. I slept well that night, better than I had in months, because there were no loose ends left tugging at my thoughts. The next morning, Lila sent one last message, saying she heard I met with Tommy, accusing me of sides and secrets, and I smiled at the irony. I replied once, simply, I wished you well, please stop contacting me, and I blocked the number. That was the moment I knew the story had truly turned, not because the past stopped knocking, but because I stopped listening for it, and ahead of me was something quieter and stronger, a life built on choice, not reaction. And the final test of that life was still coming, just not from where anyone expected. After blocking Lila, I expected relief to arrive loudly, like a victory song, but instead it came quietly, in small, ordinary moments, waking up without checking my phone, cooking dinner without old memories sneaking into the room, planning next quarter goals without factoring in emotional weather. And that was when I understood something important. Peace does not announce itself. It just stays. Business kept growing in ways I never forced. Referrals stacking up, contracts renewing without negotiation, my manager handling problems before they reached me. And I had time again. Real time. The kind you notice. I started volunteering once a month. Nothing heroic. Just helping community centers keep their spaces usable. And the irony was not lost on me. I was cleaning places where people came to rebuild themselves. One afternoon, while reviewing invoices, I got a knock on the office door. Not my house this time. And that detail mattered. When I opened it, there stood Lila's mother alone. No backup, no script. Just a tired woman holding a purse too tightly. She asked if we could talk, and I considered saying no. But something in her posture told me this was not another campaign. She told me Lila had finally moved away, chasing a fresh start somewhere else. And she said it like both a hope and a confession. She apologized, not for what her daughter did, but for the pressure, for trying to bend my decision instead of respecting it. And that apology landed cleanly. I thanked her, genuinely, and I wished her peace. And when she left, I did not feel dragged backward. I felt released. That evening, I sat alone in my house and realized something else. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt neutral, which is better. Neutrality is the soil where new things grow. I did not rush into dating. I did not need proof that I was still wanted, because the version of me sitting there knew his value without applause. A few weeks later, I ran into an old neighbor who said something casual that stuck with me. He said, "You handled all that mess pretty well. Most guys would have cracked," and I shrugged, because cracking implies breaking, and I did not break. I adjusted. The last test came quietly, like most real tests do. An offer to expand the business into a neighboring state, bigger money, bigger stress, bigger risk. And a year ago, I might have hesitated, afraid to lose balance, afraid to disrupt healing. But I realized healing was done. What remained was living, so I signed the papers. That night, I stood on my porch. Same porch where so much noise once gathered, and I laughed softly, not at anyone, just at the journey. Betrayal tried to define me. Nostalgia tried to soften me. Pressure tried to corner me, and none of it worked, because I learned the difference between being alone and being free. And freedom is not loud. It does not beg to be chosen. It simply opens the door and waits for you to walk through it. And I did, without looking back, knowing that the final chapter would not be about who left, but about who I became. A year after everything settled, I caught myself smiling at nothing. While driving between job sites, the road open, the radio low, and my mind calm. And that was when it hit me, not as a lesson carved in stone, but as a quiet truth. Life does not reward you for enduring disrespect. It rewards you for leaving it behind. I thought about the man I was when I first noticed the strange smiles, the new perfume, the questions about my schedule, and I felt no embarrassment, only gratitude. Because that version of me paid attention. People sometimes ask if I ever miss her, and I answer honestly, I miss the idea, not the reality. Because the reality taught me something valuable. Love without loyalty is just noise, and loyalty without self-respect is a slow leak you do not notice until the ground is wet. My business now runs smoother than I ever imagined, not because of luck, but because clarity sharpens decisions, and I learned to trust that clarity. I learned that walking away is not failure, it is direction, and dignity is not something others grant you. It is something you practice daily. Sometimes the doorbell rings and it is just a delivery. Sometimes it is a new opportunity, and sometimes it is silence, and I welcome all three, because none of them carry the past anymore. I am still a simple man from a simple state, But I am no longer confused, and that makes all the difference.